Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being here to listen to some other food for brain after the previous speaker. My name is Roberto Vavassori. I'm the president of CLEPA, and CLEPA is the European Association representing the automobile suppliers. Honestly, supplier of mobility. You may know or not know that in average, 75 to 80% of the value of a vehicle is represented by components. This is why some car makers today are referred to as car assemblers, because really the core technologies are all coming from suppliers. Could be technologies related to powertrain, to transmission, to autonomous driving. These are all coming from suppliers. And when you want to be proud of being European citizens, you may think that also the most advanced US cars are using a lot of European technology. You take one famous car starting with a T, and you discover that from HDMI to brakes to a lot of, let's say, software and devices from hardware are done and produced in Europe. And this is a fully electric vehicle. Actually, I find a bit silly, and I'm distorting a bit the sequence that I prepared. I find a bit silly that we discuss and fight sometimes different way to move vehicles on, or we discuss about which is the preferred way to move on. My speech will revolve about two things: convenience and freedom of choice. I believe these two values are at the really fundamental core of being a European citizen, plus mobility. Let me allow to screen a bit of history, just to put things into context, and then to come to the core discussion. We all agree, I hope, that mobility is a fundamental right of every human being. Sometimes we tend to forget this. Mobility is a fundamental factor of growth and cultural enhancement. Also this one, time to time we tend to forget. It is not yesterday, but since 10,000 years, people have found more convenient to gather together in what we call today cities. It is not since yesterday. The wheel, who of you know when it was invented, the wheel? Only 5.5 thousand years ago, which is yesterday on the line of evolution of humans. And this was really a quantum leap in human evolution, allowing a much different mobility of goods and people, only 5,000 years ago. And almost 100 years ago, another incredible things came in. Imagine the shock for one citizen to no longer see two horses, not the Citroën car, two horses in the garage, but a strange mass of iron, self-propelled. Should be shocking. And I imagine the criticism at that time saying, oh, but what about employment now? A lot of carriage drivers will lose their job. What about maintenance of horses? No, it didn't happen. And at that time, I have to say, it was fortunate that city got these sort of vehicles, because the excrement damage from horses was becoming intolerable. Lot of diseases, lot of, let's say, public diseases occurred because of this. Really, it was, if you think to large cities, they were literally covered by excrements. Excuse me for this rough picture, but it was like this. The first automobiles were moving on steam, electricity, and some with poorly refined oil. It was not that automobiles were invented with oil. Convenience caused this last source of energy to become widespread quite quickly. Convenience is not seen from the oil companies, but convenience from the perspective of citizens, who found affordable using these sort of media. Remember the Ford T, 10 million cars. Only that vehicle sold in a few years and many more after. So convenience is staying at the heart of the freedom of choice that people should continue to have. The first speed record, all of you may know or not know, occurred in 1902, and believe it or not, it was an electric car that broke first the 100 speed record. It was a French car named Jamais Content, never happy. Probably there was something in the name that continued over time, but it was electrically driven. But then it was no longer convenient to continue on this road for the time being. And it is interesting because mobility means ships, airplanes, trains, trucks, cars and motorcycles, and power generation. All of these industries have been moving for 100 years on fossil fuel. We could be happy, we could not be happy. But if we live like we live today, much better than our predecessors, it is thanks to this technology. I mean, I do not want to support any technology. Indeed, CLEPA stands for technology neutrality. Just to carve out one moment, we are not caring about which power unit will move our vehicles in 20 years from now. The important and essential thing is that the power unit meets the regulation in terms of emission and is convenient to citizens, and most of the added value will be produced, invented, manufactured in Europe. Because this is the only prerequisite. Because Europe remains competitive, continue our well-being, continue to attract innovation. Today, you have to know that our sector, the blamed mobility sector, is responsible, or if you narrow down this blamed automobile sector, is the first inventor in Europe by number of patents. And these patents, these innovations, spread in many other sectors, of course. Only the suppliers invest more than 20 billion yearly in R&I. And in recent years, they are investing more than the car manufacturers because of a thing that I said before. The majority of the content of a vehicle is driven by component makers. We live in a complex world. I like what Mr. Brancusi, the artist, the sculptor, who lived in the last century, said about his artworks. Simplicity is complexity resolved. We live in a complex world. Sometimes we make it also complicated. See in Germany these months, unnecessarily complicated, but it is a complex world nevertheless. Now we want to be able, thanks to culture and technology, to make it simpler. The best technology to me is the one you cannot see, but is effective. Because if I have to start to read manual or to become acquainted with hundreds of keys, this is not what I mean for friendly technology. But let's come back to that. In 1952, December, 1 week in December, one large European city gifted the world, unfortunately, with a new color on our palette. It is called London Smoke. Some of you have suites of this color. It is a dark gray color. In 1 week in London that December, it is not ages ago, 1952, 5,000 people in London died immediately, and soon after another 15,000, according to a more accurate research done recently. So 20,000 people died in 1952. We may blame transportation. No, transportation was not the cause. It was the wood and coal fire of households and power generation at that time in London. We may remember the Pink Floyd nice LP cover with the power generation station. This means that technology also in that case helped, because I am old enough to remember many London monuments, greyish, dark, St. Paul cathedrals, for instance. If you go and travel to London now, you find a totally different situation, despite the fact that mobility from 52 to now has increased 100 times. But we have a much better situation. Means that technology and culture and innovation, and again the convenience, caused to change the way power is generated and households are, let's say, heated and you can cook your food. This rather long premise is, in my view, useful to put also our age into context and time. The baseline, as I said, for me is that culture and convenience are the essential ingredients shaping our living together in cities. And human ingenuity, fostering technology, has always promoted sensible answers to every new topics. Imagine for one moment when you travel throughout Europe, the Roman aqueduct, Saragossa, in other many cities, 2,000 years ago. They had a necessity, culture, technology, will. That was the answer. So I don't see a big disconnect from this timeline and the technology era we live today. But there is one important changing factor, which is speed. Centuries ago, decades ago, things were moving much slower. But what is changing is the fact that the population is increasing like never happened in human history. Population mostly gathering into cities. We heard of a speaker before that more than 2/3 of population in a few years will live in cities. Many are already or will become megacities, mostly in Asia. And this is posing a totally different request. Imagine our European situation. I traveled throughout Europe during my short summer vacation. I drove my car, I have to say. I hope you don't find me guilty for this. On enjoyable roads. I didn't touch motorways in many countries. I didn't disturb anybody, I hope. But I saw many UNESCO sites and all cities built by Romans in France, in Spain, in Germany, in Italy. Means that we are now trying to implement quick changes on layers of culture and structure who are not as flexible as we want to have. So there is an increased, let's say, demand for, let's say, more convenient mobility. At the same time, we have some rigidity. And talking about this, again, convenience, we have to remember that 75% in average of all of the goods moved in Europe are delivered by truck. And this will stay for a long time. My simple assertion is no truck, no food, no cities. In one day, this city could starve because of a truck strike. Could be the fresh vegetable for your diet, could be the last purchase from Amazon, but certainly this is factual. This is not an opinion. Talking about convenience, more than 80% of the access and moves along cities, and I appreciate very much what has been said before, is occurring with cars. Do you believe people happy to make Stauen, to stay queuing in their cars? No, of course. But probably the trade-off between moving into city with different transportation media and moving with your car is different. There is a red light here, sorry. My time is over. There is much more to discuss, of course. Time is of essence, and speed is increasing. But for next time, and for who could be interested to discuss more, without ideology, with a lot of good sense, these topics, you refer to CLEPA, and we will be happy to organize something in the future. Thanks.